Welcome back. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show that you are tuned into. It is a crazy Tuesday, folks. Snow is on the way tomorrow in the region. So Melissa Tomlinson, who normally is on at this time at around 5:05 Eastern Time, is stuck in a meeting. We are hopeful that she'll be out by about 5:45. And we'll try to talk to her then. But in an emergency, we always call in our friend. He is the Renaissance man of the Jeff Santos Show. He, of course, is a musician, an investigative journalist, a great friend of the programs. You can catch him on Democracy Watch News. You can catch him on Daily Kos. And you can catch him right here every Tuesday, normally at 5:30. But today, pinch hitting at 5:10 is Mark Taylor-Canfield. Mark, thank you, my friend. How are you?
Put me in, Coach. I'm ready to bat.
There you go. Mr. Fogarty couldn't have said it better. Well, I want to talk to you because we just spoke, with nurses and teachers, which to me are the both backbones of our society. And I think the teachers, I've been saying for years, most important profession in the country, and nurses are right there alongside them. One building the future, one taking care of the current, and sometimes the sick and the old. And I bring this up because I think that this new wave, when we talk about Bernie Sanders and to a lesser extent Elizabeth Warren, bringing again that government can be really an advocate for working class and middle class people once again. And I'm wondering, when you talk to millennials and when you talk to people who have supported Ms. Sawant and so forth, how much taking care of our teachers, our firefighters, our EMT, et cetera, comes up when they're talking about their priorities?
Well, I think, that's always been a progressive priority in this part of the country, which is, you have to pay your teachers well. We've had plenty of teacher strikes in Washington State and plenty of problems with funding education in Washington State. So we're very familiar with a lot of the problems that teachers have. And by the way, and we've talked about this before, my teachers in public school and in college have been some of the most important people in my life. I mean, they have kind of set me in the direction that I went with my life. I was very inspired by some of my teachers, became mentors, and to this day still are. I still talk to them. They still follow my journalism and support me. And I think, you have a few teachers in your life that really reach out to you and understand what you're trying to accomplish and what your talents are. And, I mean, that can take you a long way. That can make the difference between a life of pursuing your dreams and a life of sort of minimum wage or something. So, which is another thing that ties in here. I mean, it's not just teachers, but just the working class in general, including the firefighters and the EMTs and all the public servants that work so hard every day to pick up your garbage, fix the water pipes when water mains when they break, or, get your electricity back on after the snowstorm, which, looks like you guys are in for. By the way, it is not snowing in Seattle, but it is pretty miserable here right now. So I can honestly say that sometimes the Seattle weather sucks, and it's just gray and cloudy and kind of that wet cold that really gets into your bones. So I'm not lying this time when I say weather up here sucks, but
we all know it's not exactly it's been raining here the last couple of days. We went from 30 and rain yesterday to 60 and rain today to tomorrow snow at about 28. So there you go. You have us beat.
The weather here is much reminiscent of the way it was in November and early December of 1999. When the World Trade Organization was in town having their ministerial conference, and activists shut down the streets, and we had that so-called, quote, battle in Seattle, unquote. So it was very similar then. We're celebrating that 20th anniversary, and events are still happening here. So people were actually out in this kind of weather on Saturday in the pouring rain, which is typical for Seattle this time of year. Lori Wallach was there, who's a major fair trade activist, and Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz was in town speaking at town hall, so I got a chance to meet with him. And people had a rally and a march, and it seemed like, Seattle 20 years ago there for a while, Jeff. It was really interesting. I mean, Seattle still has plenty of protest activity recently, especially with the women's marches and the student climate walkouts. But Seattle is feeling right now, and also we just heard the breaking news that it looks like despite the impeachment process, the Democrats, Pelosi and Trump, et al. Are going to work together on this trade agreement with Mexico. So that's been a major issue, too, on the minds of everybody up here, are these trade agreements which have sort of gutted the American economy.
I want to get to that.
Manufacturing jobs, a lot of the good paying labor union jobs that pay good benefits, good pensions, kind of job like my father had, where you can, buy a house and a couple cars and a boat and, retire early and have a good life. And we've seen a lot of the American economy gutted because of these trade agreements that the neoliberals have said is such a great idea. And we may have, another agreement now with Mexico, but as far as the NAFTA, GATT, FTAA, TPP, these have all been a disaster for American labor, for environmental protection laws, just basically, the basic democratic processes that we all supposedly believe in. Now, we had also all day long workshops, both last Saturday, November 30th, which was the official kickoff of those demonstrations. The N30 is the name of my song, the Battle of N30, because of that. And also December 7th, which was also Pearl Harbor Day, was the last day, I believe, that the WTO was in Seattle officially. The conferences kind of fell apart. Madeleine Albright was stuck in her hotel room and couldn't get out.
That's so sad.
Demonstrations. Bill Clinton was claiming he wasn't going to come to town. The African delegates walked out, and it really set the whole organization back. But part of the reason that we've been talking about this stuff in Seattle is there are these new trade agreements, especially the TPP and others that have come along. And what Lori Wallach and what others were trying to explain is that, and Professor Stiglitz, is that you have corporations like Amazon, who get involved with these trade agreement processes in these trade agreement negotiations, and they end up trying to get their little piece of the market in there, their benefits specifically for them. A lot of corporations like these trade agreements because they see it as a way of kind of secretly getting things that they can't get from their own governments, right? Like less regulation, weaker labor laws and
environmental standards, etc. I want to get to the heart, though, because you had talked to Joseph Stiglitz, of course, a great economist and so forth, who harkens us back to the days of FDR and so forth. What did he have to say about these deals that Pelosi and others unveiled today? Massachusetts Representative Stephen Neal was one of the people who had pushed this new trade, USMCA through and so forth. What are they saying about this? What was Lori Wallach, formerly, I think, of the PERG system? What was she saying in general about this particular piece of legislation?
Well, Lori has also been with Public Citizen, which is an organization that Ralph Nader founded many years ago.
Well, PERGs are too.
Yeah, I think the general consensus was that there's still a battle to be waged because of the push for these new fast-track treaties. Now, one thing that came up is why does the President of the United States, this goes back to the Constitution, but why does the President of the United States have so much power when it comes to trade negotiation when in other responsibilities there's a check and balance between him and Congress, or her and Congress? In this case, the President has the right to just push these trade agreements through Congress on the fast-track basis. The undemocratic nature of a lot of these negotiations still continues. They haven't opened up the process to NGOs and other organizations the way that they should or could. There are still plenty of meetings that are being held in secret, Jeff, and the WTO actually itself, the World Trade Organization, has become a bit more secretive, only because, they've faced so much public opposition with all the mass demonstrations. So one of the issues that I brought up actually during the panel discussion was, or actually during, and also during Joseph Stiglitz's keynote address at Town Hall, was how will the Green New Deal, if it is embraced as a new economic policy in the United States on the level of, an FDR-style New Deal, how would that affect our trade negotiations, and how would it affect these international treaties, or how it affect these international treaties? And Stiglitz was very clear about the fact that he thought that a Green New Deal policy, and we're talking from his point of view, we're talking a direct mobilization of the population in a very similar manner, at least with the way that the population was mobilized during World War II to defeat the Nazis and, Imperial Japan. He's saying if it comes down to that, we as a nation are capable of doing that. We have the resources, we have the infrastructure, at least the basic infrastructure on these new technologies to expand the workforce. And also he thinks that because of the benefits to our economy, it would put us in a good position in terms of negotiating a lot of these trade agreements, because we would be negotiating from a position of strength, being the leader in this kind of movement. So it was interesting to hear what he had to say about this progressive move towards a Green New Deal as sort of the mass mobilization for our culture on a level of what happened during World War II. I mean, he was very serious about thinking that that's both possible and necessary, and that it would really improve position when it comes to negotiating trade agreements. As far as the new levels of secrecy and the corporate influence, yes, there was talk about, Amazon, and one of the workshops was about Amazon and its sort of push towards a new global market economy, which, of course, supports and protects, multinational monopolies like Amazon. So we have to be very careful, too, that some of these new players on the scene, some of these gigantic tech companies like Amazon, don't also kind of take over the process and push us in a direction that we've already seen in Seattle, that we don't want to go, which is just mass corporate monopolies, wiping out all of the small businesses around the world. That's part of the issue, too, of corporate globalization, is this. Not only their push for privatization of government services, and education, but also this idea that market monopolies are okay. And you would think that when you're considering something like a quote fair trade position, unquote, that you would consider market monopolies as anti-trade. Also, I wanted to mention too that Stiglitz talked about a lot of these trade agreements and their direct effect on our import-export balance. It really hasn't changed our trade balance at all, these major treaties. What it's done is just changed who we trade with. And he mentioned that since Trump has been in office, our trade imbalance so we have a large deficit, but we also have a large trade deficit, which has increased by about 20% since Trump's been in office. So there's your great economy, Jeff.
Yeah, there is your great economy, Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield, our guest here, a little bit earlier than normal here on the Jeff Santos Show. We will be speaking to Melissa Tomlinson at about 5:35, 5:40 here, as we speak currently with Mark Taylor-Canfield, usually in that 5:30 slot. Let me ask you about something that I think that has also happened over the last a number of years, looking back at 1999, and that, of course, was looking back at that the WTO. Talk to me about, you had your experiences, of being pelted with, with gas and so forth. how has this made your life different? How you look at news coverage, going to live events? What happened in 1999.
I was just lost in thought there for a second, because that's exactly the same question that I've asked a lot of the people I've interviewed who were there on the streets during those mass protests. Is how has it changed you? What is your most important memory? What is it that sticks with you? And for me, my letter was published in the Seattle Times about this. There are several legacies, of course, many different ways of looking at the WTO protests in Seattle and all the results of that. And one legacy, of course, was the mass violation of people's civil rights, which is a story that hasn't been adequately told. But we did talk about it on your program last week, and I was involved with a group of citizens who formed an independent committee to look into the civil rights violations and then reported our conclusions to the Center for Constitutional Rights. But that's one legacy. That's one thing that I have a major memory of is, police in plastic body armor, the RoboCop look. It was kind of frightening. This real sense of intimidation that was on the streets, where you really couldn't trust the police. Like, you didn't know if they would just tear gas you or pepper spray you indiscriminately. A lot of the police did not wear identification badges or name tags, because some of them were brought in accord with mutual aid agreements that the different police agencies, law enforcement agencies in this area had. So they were bringing in police from other towns who didn't live in Seattle and had no sense of accountability for what they did when they went out on the streets. So there's that. There's also this big project we had. It was a news clipping project and a video archiving project. And it turns out that it may have been one of the most well-documented series of protests in the history of the planet, because at that time, we were just on the verge of a new communications revolution, and people were just starting to use the modern technology that we all use online today to communicate and to share videos and things. So tons and tons of video was taken. I know Joe Friedberg, who produced the famous documentary, This Is What Democracy Looks Like, has been going through hundreds and hundreds of hours of video that's never been seen, and there's also a huge archive at the University of Washington's Labor Center. There's an archive, I guess, growing now at the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. So people are doing a really good job. I've got an archive. I know other people who have, there's an attorney that I work with, actually, named John Scannell, who has a huge archive as well. He was an attorney on a class action lawsuit against the police department and the city for the mass, tear gassing of the Capitol Hill neighborhood. And he, so there's a lot of stuff out there. And so there's a lot of memories. I think one of the memories is from monitoring the media, I realized that corporate media was not really telling the truth, that they were spinning it in whatever direction felt beneficial to them at the moment.
Right.
The current station that's owned by Sinclair here in Seattle, KOMO, and there's a famous scene in there's a famous scene in the documentary that Jill did. This Is What Democracy Looks Like, and I highly recommend people check it out. KOMO announces that they will refuse to report on any demonstrations that were not officially permitted by the city. So then you had Nick Licata, who was our city council member, and another one of my mentors, who is in the film saying, oh, well, this is a very bad sign, because this is what happens when you have a police department, working in tandem with government, right, to suppress people's rights.
And media, of course, on top of that. So there you go. No, I mean, it's disgusting. But that's, that is where we're at. There are Sinclair medias here in the New England area as well. And we have to be very much aware of what has happened. If you've been having them for 20 years, they're a little bit newer in this part of the country. But I mean, that's what we talked about earlier about what these what somehow Democrats under Bill Clinton and others sold out on. And one of the things was the control of radio and TV stations, where one major corporation could buy up to 7 at one point. I don't know if it's a 10 now. You can own radio stations and or TV stations, and I think it's combined. I think you can open 7 or 10. But yeah, I mean, this is the Murdochization, if you might, of where we are, and you see it there. It's really tragic.
Gotten worse. The corporate media consolidation, the ownership consolidation, has been encouraged by the FCC since the WTO demonstration. It's only gotten worse since then, unfortunately.
No, it is, and that's the tragedy of it all. Mark, always great catching up. Thank you for adjusting at the last second to us. I know Melissa appreciates it, and we do here as well. What to look for next week, my man, when we have you back on at 5:30? Anything you can tell us?
Well, I got some music and some writing projects going on, and we have a new struggle to save the Showbox Theater, so there's another hearing coming up that's going to be very important to musicians and music fans in Seattle and around the world.
Keep that going, and if there is a website that people can go to save the Showbox, let me know about that too. We'll post it on our website and so forth.
Yeah, and you can also go to my YouTube channel, MTC Report, and Facebook and Twitter to follow what I'm doing, and Instagram and all that stuff. So, yeah, there is SaveTheShowbox.org is one of the websites. There's actually several in Seattle. HistoricSeattle.org is another great one because they're the group, along with another group of music aficionados in town, have decided to get together and try to buy the Showbox. So Historic Seattle is on top of this whole issue. They're sort of the main organizing group at this point, and they're the organization that everybody else in town is trying to support and hoping that they can buy this historic venue and keep it as one of the best music venues in the country.
Well, they need to do that. And again, that's SaveTheShowbox.org. Mark, thank you so much, my friend. We will talk to you next Tuesday, as we've been taking you at different times over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Thank you, my man. Talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure, Jeff. Have a good weekend. Have a good weekend.
That too. Thank you. That was Mark Taylor-Canfield. This is Jeff Santos. Take a break, and then Melissa Tomlinson around the bend.
For the deal, and U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said a short time ago that Democrats would never hold up a deal that's good for the country just because they're working to try to impeach President Trump.
We would never, not any one of us is important enough for us to hold up a trade agreement that is important for American workers.
Minutes before Pelosi spoke, the House Judiciary Committee approved 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. They say he betrayed the nation's trust and endangered U.S. national security. This is USA Radio News. The Justice Department's Inspector General finds there was no bias when the Russia investigation was launched, but the report still says there was plenty of misconduct by some FBI agents. Here's USA Radio's Robin Walensky.
476 pages, including an executive summary. It's taken almost 2 years to complete, the IG Michael Horowitz finding FBI performance failures, but no political bias. He writes, "We did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the FBI's decision to seek FISA authority on Carter Page. He's the former Trump campaign advisor surveilled by the FBI back in 2016.
President Trump will be attending Saturday's annual Army-Navy football game in Philadelphia. It'll be the president's 3rd time attending the game. He did so as president-elect in 2016 and again in 2018. This is USA Radio News. Public health companies and LGBTQ groups are asking Facebook to remove misleading ads about HIV prevention medication. The ads, which link to law firms and ongoing lawsuits, proved medication causing kidney failure and bone density problems. Advocacy groups are concerned the ads could scare people away from treatment. Facebook says its fact checkers haven't found any falsehoods with the ads. Find us online at usaradio.com. For USA Radio News, I'm Chris Barnes.
Everything we heard in 2 weeks of testimony backed up the charge that President Trump muscled Ukraine for political gain, said Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal. House Republicans haven't even bothered protesting that Trump would never stoop to investigating a political rival. because everyone knows this is how he operates. The case has been so clearly made, you wonder what exactly the Senate will be left doing. With the trial coming so close to an election, Republican senators will probably decide to let the people decide. Since our country is so bitterly divided, that's the best way to go. The hearings haven't changed voters' minds, said Jennifer Agiesta in CNN.com. Support for impeachment remains exactly the same as it was in October. 50% of Americans say Trump should be impeached and removed from office, while 43% say no. Democrats have only themselves to blame for their failure to move the needle, said Noah Rothman in NBCNews.com. It's undeniable that Trump abused his power for personal gain, but Democrats have seized on the term bribery, hoping it would resonate more with voters than abuse of power or blackmail. These rhetorical contortions have backfired, allowing Republicans to argue that Trump didn't actually receive or give any bribes. Trump's worst crime is his assault on democracy, said Adam Serwer in TheAtlantic.com. He tried to rig the 2020 election by blackmailing a weaker foreign country at war with Russia to cook up bogus charges against one of the leading Democratic candidates. It was, in short, a conspiracy by Trump and his advisors to keep themselves in power by leveraging the power of the presidency. The Republic's founders foresaw such a circumstance and created the impeachment clause as a last resort against it. The primary crime for which Trump is being impeached, scheming to defraud the American people of a free and fair election. Investigating whether President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, broke lobbying laws or hid his work for foreign governments, the Wall Street Journal reported this week. Manhattan-based federal prosecutors said the FBI have issued subpoenas for seeking information on payments to Giuliani and his security consulting firm. The wide-ranging inquiry has already led to money laundering charges against Giuliani associates, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who both pleaded not guilty. Giuliani quarterbacked President Trump's effort to collect dirt on Joe Biden and his son Hunter, and was paid $500,000 last year by Parnas' company. He denies any wrongdoing. There's obviously a concerted effort to spread as many lies about me as possible, he said, so that I'm not credible when I'm continuing to reveal all of the massive evidence of criminality by the Bidens. And in Montgomery, Alabama, rogue cop. A white police officer was convicted of manslaughter this week for killing an unarmed black man, Greg Gunn, steps from the house he shared with his mother. Gunn, 58, was stopped and patted down while returning home from a late-night poker game in 2016. Aaron Smith, 26, says Gunn fled, causing Smith to tackle him, tase him 3 times, hit him across the head with a police baton, and finally shoot him 5 times, first in the back. Prosecutors said Smith changed his story repeatedly, and his claim that Gunn swung a painter's pole was undermined by the fact that Gunn was holding his baseball cap. Smith failed to turn on his body and dashboard cameras before the stop. The Montgomery Police Department was criticized for retaining Smith until his conviction. He now faces 10 to 20 years in prison. And also in New York City, big spender. Michael Bloomberg officially kicked off a Democratic presidential bid this week that will be boosted by an unprecedented self-funded ad blitz. Bloomberg, New York's mayor from 2002 to 2013, launched his campaign with $31 million in nationwide TV ads, pitching himself as the candidate most likely to defeat President Trump. Bloomberg, 77, a former Republican, who registered as a Democrat last year, backs higher taxes, gun reform, and an expansion of Obamacare. Earlier this month, he apologized for stop and frisk, a policing strategy that was often criticized for racial bias during his years as mayor. Worth an estimated $54 billion, Bloomberg said he won't accept donations and plans to spend at least $500 million in the primary season. including $100 million in anti-Trump digital ads. Competitors condemned the outsized spending by Bloomberg, who intends to bypass the first 4 primary and caucus states. Elections should not be for sale, Senator Elizabeth Warren said. And in Washington, D.C., absolutely not. Presidents are not kings, U.S. District Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson said this week, ruling that White House counsel Donald McGahn must testify before the House Judiciary Committee and striking a blow at President Trump's efforts to stonewall investigations. The White House had ordered McGahn, whom Democrats have called the single most important witness for determining whether Trump obstructed the Mueller probe, to defy the House's subpoena. Yet, Presidents, Jackson ruled, do not have subjects bound by loyalty or blood whose destiny they are entitled to control. She called the administration's legal claim an absolute immunity that would shield top presidential advisors from this testifying fiction. Many key potential witnesses in the House impeachment inquiry could now be compelled to testify, though the White House will appeal the ruling. If McGahn does testify, he could still invoke executive privilege to limit his testimony. And in Bogota, Colombia, diplomats dish on U.S. 2 of Colombia's top diplomats were caught on tape saying that the U.S. State Department has been destroyed and calling a U.S.-backed effort to get humanitarian aid into Venezuela earlier this year a fiasco. The embarrassing recording, released last week by Colombian newspaper Publimetro, captures the country's ambassador to the U.S., Francisco Santos, offering advice to Foreign Minister-designate Claudia Blum in a Washington, D.C. cafe. Santos says that when he was vice president a decade ago, the State Department was the vital first stop for the dignitaries visiting Washington. But now it's destroyed. It doesn't exist, he says, because of weak leaders who can't speak for President Trump. Santos also told Blum to make the Americans understand that the crisis in Venezuela could destabilize the whole of South America. Because here there is no memory. After 10 minutes they get bored and go to another topic. And in La Paz, Bolivia, condemning Morales. Bolivia's interim government has accused ousted socialist President Evo Morales of committing terrorism and sedition after he allegedly organized Hollywood blockades to prevent food from reaching certain cities. A video circulating in Bolivia purports to show Morales coordinating the blockades via phone from Mexico, where he has been living in exile after he was accused of trying to rig the October 20th elections. Morales called the recording a setup. Meanwhile, interim President Jeanine Áñez signed a law this week providing for new elections in which Morales will not be allowed to run. The nation's first indigenous president, Morales was in office 14 years and defied term limits to run in the October vote. Gay man flees. Russian authorities have launched a sexual assault investigation over a YouTube video in which a gay man answers questions from children about his life experiences. In the video, part of a series which kids interview people from different walks of life, 22-year-old Maxim Pankaratov chats with several children ages 7 to 13. Answering their questions, he says he realized he was gay at the age of 14 and that he can't legally get married in Russia. Lawmaker Pyotr Tolstoy, a descendant of the author of War and Peace, demanded a police investigation of the video, declaring, "What I saw there can't leave any parent unfazed," Pankratov said, and filmmaker Victoria Peach were inundated with death threats and fled abroad to avoid arrest. A 2013 law made teaching children about homosexuality a crime. Leaked documents have revealed the Chinese Communist Party's systematic efforts to stamp out the culture of the Uyghurs, a Turkic-speaking Muslim minority from the Xinjiang region. Beijing says that more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims being held in camps are there for voluntary job training. But one document leaked to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists states outright that minorities are locked up to wash brains, cleanse hearts, support the right, remove the wrong. Artificial intelligence is used to identify those who need to be re-educated. Inside the camps, internees are graded on how well they speak China's dominant Mandarin language and obey rules on everything from bathing to using the toilet. Inmates are only released when they hit a high enough score. And in Hong Kong, pro-democracy sweep. In a stinging rebuke to Beijing, pro-democracy candidates won an overwhelming majority in local elections this week, with a record turnout of about 71% of eligible voters. Candidates who oppose China's increasing influence took 389 of 452 seats, up from only 124. That will give reformers more say in the choice of Hong Kong's next leader, although the Electoral College is largely appointed by Beijing. Many of the new lawmakers are in their early 20s, and some campaigned in the uniform of the protest movement that has shaken the city for 6 months. Black clothes, yellow hard hat, and respirator to protect against tear gas. Their victory punched a hole in Beijing's claim that a silent majority of Hong Kongers opposed the protest. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that irrespective of the results, Hong Kong is part of China.